Climb into the cockpit with pilot and Link Square's Chief Legal Officer, Tim Perilla, as he invites legal leaders aboard to share advice that will help you navigate even the most turbulent times of in-house counsel work. We'll cover a range of topics from data privacy to legal team structure to public company transactions and beyond. You don't want to miss this series. Fasten your seatbelt and prepare for takeoff. You're listening to Cockpit Counsel.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Cockpit Counsel. My name is Tim. I'm the Chief Legal Officer at Link Squares. And as always, we have Alyssa Verzino with us, our producer. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. And today we have Ashlyn Donohue. Ashlyn is our outstanding director of legal here. I have the privilege of having her on my legal team. She does all of the things that I'm not very good at, everything from reviewing contracts to handling any customer disputes or anything like that, and managing people as well, which is fun. So welcome, Ashlyn.
Thanks for having me.
Start out every episode the same. What's your pre-flight ritual?
Ooh, my pre-flight ritual is to arrive overly early to the airplane, which has only been heightened since I have kids. They have to swab, I don't know if you know this, every diaper wipe pack that you have.
Really?
And they swab the diapers. And so now I buffer what was my 2-hour pre-flight ritual at the airport is now 2.5.
Oh my gosh.
Never want to be stuck at security.
That sounds like a nightmare. So let's talk about your career a little bit. Obviously, you've been here for about a year and a half now, right?
Yep.
Where were you before? Let's walk through. Let's start at the beginning.
Oh, start at the beginning.
Yeah.
All right. So
walk through your career.
After law school, I really was solely focused on negotiating tech contracts. That is the only thing I wanted to do. And so I was very fortunate to land at Oracle as a deal manager, which is essentially acting as the deal hub for your sales cycle. And I got to work with amazing folks across the business, from the sales team to legal, for complex matters, which is a great way to learn. It's like having a phone a friend every time you're not really sure what to do early in your career. And I did that for a while, but really fell in love with how to make decisions for an organization. So decided to spend a little bit of time in an operations capacity. I became a business intelligence reporting analyst for a couple years.
Nice.
And I looked at data to drive strategic recommendations in the quote to cash lifecycle, managed all of our global contract systems internally, from user requirements drafting all the way to we were the team you called for outages, for bug supports and user testing. So it was a really good experience to learn how to run a business, and really wanted to go back into that more legal capacity, negotiating deals. I missed that. I don't know if everyone misses the end of quarter, but I really did.
Right.
So
the thrill of the fight.
Oh, I love it. It's
Oh yeah.
you have to, right? Otherwise, you're not gonna have that much fun. So
Yeah.
I went back I joined HubSpot in a hybrid role and did a little bit of legal operations. I was their first legal ops hire, and also did their sales and vendor commercial transactions, and kind of grew my career there, ending up as the global legal lead for vendor management, and built out that team and function on the commercial side. And here I am.
Awesome. So how did you make that transition into the more business-centric role, coming from the contract side? Was there just an open rec and you applied for it, or did you sort of create that role through talking with people? How did you go through that?
I guess I would say there was definitely an open rec, but there was opportunities frequently to help ops out. So participate in testing, be the person who helped create the training and enablement materials, become a super user, so the person that your team would go to for questions on how to use the tool. And one of the things that I love about tech companies is they're constantly changing. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't matter if you've been there 5 years or 1 year. When your tech changes, you have an opportunity to become the expert. And I always left at those. And so started working really closely with the ops team. And when they had a role, I just jumped at the opportunity to wear that hat and see how they were making the decisions they were.
That's awesome. What's one of the biggest things that, if you had to distill down that entire part of your career, what were some of the biggest takeaways that you had? Maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah, the biggest takeaways are remain adaptable. I worked on a lot of projects that never completed because priorities shift so frequently, or maybe they didn't complete the way I wanted them to.
Right.
So being adaptable would be my number one. The second is focus on scale and what scale means for your organization in that moment, because whether you're a company of 200 or a company of 10,000, you need to think about how you're going to grow your business and scale alongside it. But how that shows up at 200 is very different than 10,000.
Right.
And third is just the importance of process and consistency.
Nice. So speaking of consistency, I know one of the things we wanted to talk about here was Playbooks. Can you just talk a little bit about your, high level stance on approach for Playbooks and how you think about how teams can best leverage them?
Yeah, I think Playbooks empower your teams to make autonomous decisions faster and really support the biggest business organizations at scale with a consistent approach to how they're managing things. So the last thing you really want as a legal team is forum shopping.
Yes.
It's just terrible to be in the position where they're like searching the person they want.
It's bad for so many reasons.
So many reasons. But it happens because
all the time.
Yeah. Folks don't approach things the same way. And it's like, oh, I know if I go to so-and-so over there, they're going to just like let this one slide, but she won't. So if you document kind of your positions, you get ahead of that and you make sure that folks feel like they're going to get the best support and the best service from your team each and every time they come, regardless of who comes in the door to pick up that ticket or that request. And I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Consistency is everything, right? Yep. That's a big thing that I talk about pretty regularly on Cockpit Counsel. Is just like if you can make sure that your output is consistent and assuming it's consistently high quality, then you're going to have a pretty high performing team, just generally speaking. And even in the eyes of the business, like the business is like, yeah, I know what I'm going to get from the legal team, and it helps to avoid a lot of that forum shopping, but it still happens.
Yeah.
It still happens. Like there are always people who are like, oh, don't make me go to so and so on this.
It does.
So anyway, so how do you get started with Playbooks? What are some of the initial things that you should be thinking about, and where do you start?
Yeah, so for me, I'm pretty data-driven. So I'm always thinking about what the biggest bang for my buck is going to be from an investment perspective when building out a playbook. It does take time, but it really helps. Like I've talked to a lot of people over the years, and they're like, I'm the only one who does it, so who really cares? Like I don't need a playbook. Mm-hmm. And then they hire someone, and they're like, oh no, like now I have to like manually tell them everything I do every day, which I maybe do once a year. And so I think it's really just thinking through, where can you focus on the volume that you have to either delegate out to different folks on the team, empower other folks to participate in, but really taking a risk-based approach to how you build it out. I think you have a possibility of getting too rigid in how your team will support the business if you just say, like, do this and, like, no deviation, right? So really just starting to think through, like, how can I impact folks the best, but also empower them to make decisions within the confines of our risk tolerance, but not hamstring them so much that, like, they're asking questions every 5 seconds about what to do.
Right. That's a great point. Like, a lot of lawyers get really stuck on, like, well, I know how to do this, and I'm going to focus on, providing this aspect of the legal work. And when you start talking about things like Playbooks or some of the sort of non-legal analysis stuff that you should be doing as an in-house lawyer, people are like tend to shy away from doing that. Like, oh, I'm too busy to do that. And it's like, no, that's like, this is a legitimate part of your job that you're not doing, right?
Yes.
And like having that shift in mindset, I think is really, really important, because you're right. Like, it's not important until it becomes extremely important for you.
And I think lawyers are, I don't know anyone in-house who's not always super busy.
Yeah.
It's just like the name of the game. But if you want to grow alongside the business and like what you're doing on a day-to-day perspective, you can't do that if you can't get out of the weeds. And you can't get out of the weeds without enabling and empowering other folks to do it.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it is interesting to hear people talk about like, oh, I'm so busy, so busy. And it's like, that should not be the goal,
No.
right? Like you should try to figure out how to work yourself out of a job.
Yes.
Like, that's the only way to actually move up or further your career or fully develop your skill set is to basically get other people to help you. Right?
Yes. I had a boss once who told me, and this was probably the best advice I ever got, like my goal is to go on vacation and no one knows I'm missing. If I have worked myself out of a job, so like you could just step in, I can go do other things.
That's right.
Until that happens, I can't grow. So you need to figure out how to grow so I can as well.
That's exactly it. It's nice, like, you know, between you and Jonathan and Ashley, it's, you know, I spend a relatively small amount of my time on legal matters, which is great, right? It's a lot of fun. So sorry that you have to do all that.
We have fun.
Yeah. I'm glad you like it, though. So, oh, gosh, we are way off script right now. Anyway, so thinking about legal leaders, how do you once you've identified the first couple of things you want to create playbooks for, how do you go about implementation? Maybe talk about it in terms of a small team and then maybe larger teams.
Yeah. So I think that one of the things that folks get hung up on is like perfection. Playbooks are iterative, they're adaptable, and you know, you should be in a position where you're building out small chunks of playbooks over time that you're rolling out and constantly stepping back and saying, ooh, have I created too much complexity? What can I consolidate? How can I improve this? And so I think that like if you're a team of 4, like we are, creating playbooks that are concise, short to the point, you know, documented enough that you know exactly what you need to do and how to make the right decisions, and communicating that out amongst our team or the impacted stakeholders, whether that's just like over Slack or email, is probably fine. When you're talking about large-scale organizations where you have hundreds, if not thousands of people that are going to be picking up this process, there's a lot more that goes into that. It is, you know, there's more consistency, I will say, probably with how you document and write it out. There's probably some knowledge management guidelines. There's videos often that you go along with the process, documents and playbooks that you're releasing. It's not to say you can't do that with a smaller org, but usually you can have like a 15-minute meeting and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it now, and walk through it and you're covered. Whereas when you have new folks joining every week or every 2 weeks, you want to make sure it's like on a Loom or video or something that you can ship out and say, hey, watch this, and that way it saves you time.
Right. You don't have to have the same meeting over and over again every couple of weeks.
Yes.
It's nice.
Yeah. In my last role, I was hiring quite a bit, and I realized I was training everyone manually on how to do something. It's like, this is ridiculous. I can just put it in Loom, and when they join, I'll just give them a hyperlink, and saved me hours.
So, resources for folks to get started with playbooks. You did something called Playbook for Creating a Playbook.
Yeah.
And, which was pretty great, wildly popular. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I worked with the marketing team here at Link Squares to come up with a playbook for how to create a playbook. And it sounds kind of silly. It's something I've actually implemented in my last couple roles, is a consistent framework for folks to document, because not everyone's going, not one person is responsible. And so using that same methodology to just give folks a framework for how to start, to think about what to even include, because starting is the hardest part.
Yeah.
Once you've started, it's pretty easy.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Just kind of keep the ball rolling, and you learn a little bit each time. Like, every organization is a little bit different, and your team always reacts to different things in slightly different ways. So being able to at least have some like track that you're going down is always helpful.
Yep.
So big part of playbooks, particularly when you have cross-functional initiatives in there, is getting buy-in from other parts of the organization. How would you suggest folks go about that?
Yeah, I think this is going into seeking to understand perspective. It's really spending the time to make sure you have a deep understanding of your business, but then spending time to understand why the change you're proposing is going to impact them will help you sell it, right? It's all about change management. And they don't necessarily care if it's going to help your legal team out and save you a couple hours a week. But if you can show it's going to help you close deals faster for the sales side, that's going to get the buy-in and help them, kind of communicate across their teams. This is really important. If you do this, you'll get your deal closed faster. And so it's really just understanding each team's goals and then kind of working the selling through that.
Right, exactly. Telling me like, I understand your goal, and it will be easier for you if you just do it this way, please.
Yes, exactly. Right. Yes, it's like, why log a agreement request here? It's like, well, the legal team will get it faster, and then you'll get a response quicker, and your deal will close quicker.
Yeah. That's a much better way of putting it, as opposed to, well, we just simply won't do it if you do it.
Yeah, right. Which no one wants to hear that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's when you start forum shopping.
That's right. Then it's like, all right, we're going to Jonathan now. So a lot of this also dovetails with change management. Can you talk a little bit about how you've handled cross-functional change management, both here at Link Squares and in prior roles?
Yeah, I think you have to be really transparent about where you're at and where you're headed, and set proper expectations, because scale and change is iterative, and you may have a goal that you're looking towards, but you're probably not going to get it on your first pass. And that's okay. Like, you can't reach your finish line if you don't hit all the milestones along the way. And so making sure that teams understand, like, this is phase one, this is where we're going to get to with this. We understand that's not really what you're looking for, but here's how we're going to make that next step or that next leap. And showing every time you roll something out that you're open to adapting. Like, I've done stuff and people come back and they're like, that really isn't working for us. Like, it sucks, to be honest. Yeah. And you're like, oh, shoot, sorry, mistake. Right. Like, let me fix that, and it happens. And whether that's like I updated a workflow and now it routes to the wrong person, whoops, right. Like, we can make those quick changes. But if you're not receptive to feedback and you're like, ooh, I just did that, I don't really want to change it, like, just see how it feels and like sit with it for 6 months, people aren't going to be so receptive to the next suggestion.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, taking that feedback and incorporating it. Now, when you have a situation, though, where people are asking you to change something that you feel pretty strongly needs to be in place, how do you handle those situations?
Yeah, those can be tough. And I think that is where if I haven't already pulled the data, I'm really looking at the data and asking them to come to the table with some as well, right? Because a lot of times it's gut feel. Yeah. And if you each show up with some objective measures and you can talk about the whys behind the decisions you've made, you might have a really strong opinion and you could be swayed by what you're seeing, or you could show up and say, hey, like, I know you're saying that we really need to make this change, but here's all the data that demonstrates why. Like, it's not legal slowing down your deal, or whatever the case might be.
Right.
I think you have to know when to stand your ground and when to be willing to just say, like, I feel really strongly about this, but let's find some middle path. Yeah,
absolutely. So when you think about some of the sort of necessary part, like guideposts within the playbooks, like, maybe this is getting a little bit tactical, but like, there are certain legal strongholds that you have to take, particularly like with regard to contracts. Mm-hmm. Our organization has a couple of them that are just non-negotiable, and they are just sort of like straight up legal issues. Mm-hmm. How do you work directly with the business to help them understand and just get comfortable with the fact that if whoever they're selling to can't agree to this position, then you walk away from the deal? Like, that's a really hard thing to tell people.
Yeah.
But at some point, you run into that as a legal team. How have you navigated that?
I think that the best way to do that is to have a pretty open door policy on the why. Again, it's all about that transparency. If you're just saying, like, no, sorry, deal's not moving forward, like, they're just going to go to their boss and say, hey, Ashlyn, I don't want to work with Ashlyn anymore. Like, she's terrible.
Help me forum shop, please.
Yeah. Is Jonathan available?
Yeah.
But I think if you explain to them and get on the call, and I hop on the phone with our stakeholders all the time, and I've done so in every organization, whether that's through office hours, holding open question sessions, or just like deal by deal, and explaining, hey, this is really important to us as a company, and here's why it matters, not just to me, but to you. And I haven't run into a single situation yet where folks, they might not like my answer, but they understand it.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think putting things into context for people is always really helpful. And the handful of things obviously before you joined, before Jonathan joined, I really was doing a lot of contract review, as dangerous as that may sound. And, and, talking with folks on the sales team here, like at first, like some of the things I was like, yeah, we just can't have this. They're like, oh my gosh, like our customers are going to have it. I'm like, no, they won't. Like they'll get it. It's okay. And it's, I don't think we've lost any deals because of our hard stances. Like
no,
most people get it. And to the extent that customers literally cannot agree to some of those things because of issues around their business, we've been able to find workarounds.
Yep.
Right. Which has been good. So, let's talk a little bit more about sort of your day-to-day lawyering.
Okay.
All right. You said you missed the deals. What do you like most about it?
What do I like most about it?
Yeah.
I think that to me, every contract is a little bit of a puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
I think folks early in their career look at things as like a clause by clause review, and it's like, ooh, indemnity, check that one off. Let's move on to limitation liability. And I think that the untangling of the complexity of how all of your contract provisions interplay is just exciting. And, I remember closing deals and being up till 3 or 4 in the morning early in my career. And it's fun, right? Like there's a lot of energy and excitement about that. And, it's something that you love. And I took a strength vendors a couple years ago, and that was, pretty much what it said. You like high pressure, high intensity,
right,
last minute things. And I'm like, great. Right line of work for me.
I am who I am.
Yeah.
Unapologetic about it. I like that. No, that's doing deals is fun. That was, there's some of my favorite points throughout my career. I can go back to like particular deals that we were working on that were just a ton of fun. I mean, one of the big ones that immediately comes to mind was working through the Major League Baseball deal at DraftKings back in 2015, I want to say.
Yeah.
Somewhere in there. It was a massive deal, and I remember like going to MLB offices and like sitting down with the guy named Mike Mellis, a great guy, was general counsel of MLB at the time, and and just going. It was like it had to have been like a 2-month plus long negotiation, like literally like contract turns back and forth. It was a sizable deal, but that was it. It was like, oh, we got to get this turned around and working until all hours of the night and into the early morning hours. There's just a lot to be said, and then like the negotiation, playing good cop bad cop with Jason Robbins on one end of that, and me on the other. It's a lot of fun, and then like it was great to. That summer of 2015, baseball invited us to the All-Star game in Cincinnati, which was a ton of fun. So it was great to spend some time with some of the leadership there and watching the game in their suite and all that sort of stuff. It was really great, but it all started with a deal.
Right. Like, it just, you never know where it's going to lead.
Yeah.
And you'll always remember that.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Have you had the opportunity to do any litigation around any contracts that you've negotiated?
Thankfully, I have not.
Okay, that's one of the things like it'll be fun when at some point it happens. You learn a lot about how to draft when you start going through some of that stuff. So.
Yeah, one of the things I think Jonathan does a really good job of challenging us to do is check case law. which I think a lot of in-house teams tend to shy away from because you're moving quick. You have high velocity, but he's really good about saying like, oh, did you review the case law? Like, how did this come out in a couple of cases? And you're like, oh, good call.
Yeah, it's shocking how lawyers need to refer to the law from time to time. Like, seriously, you would be surprised how infrequently that actually happens in most places.
Yeah. Well, it's just like you're negotiating a contract. The first thing you don't think is case law.
Right.
But it's really kind of the best way to learn how to negotiate better. And I saw on LinkedIn someone posted, like, how do most attorneys learn? And it's from listening to the other side. You have no idea if what they're saying is true or right. You're just like, oh, I'll use that on my next deal.
Right.
So it's really, you have to be intentional about like learning the right way to do things.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think there's a big part of, early in my career, what I decided, I had a couple of mentors, but like I started my career in-house and really just didn't have, I didn't have a ton of, I didn't have a lawyer for a boss, really ever in my career, which is interesting. So I kind of had to figure a lot of stuff out by myself. But what I found is that, like you had mentioned early in your career, you're looking at check the box on this clause, that clause. Is this okay? Is that okay? And understanding what every provision in the contract is meant to do is really, really important. I know we've talked about this where it's and a ton of lawyers do this where they're like, all right, you have your warranty disclaimer and then you have a warranty in another part of the agreement. And people are like, oh, I like this warranty disclaimer, I want to carve out X, Y, and Z. And it's like, all right, the purpose of that warranty disclaimer is not to affect that that express warranty that's made. It's actually to get rid of all of these other warranties that arise as a matter of law in just about every single jurisdiction. And it's astounding to me how many lawyers don't understand that that's the case.
Yes.
And even that some of these warranties will attach by operation of law, right? So if you don't have that disclaimer, then you know what, you're kind of stuck with an implied warranty of merchantability.
Yep.
Which may be okay, which may not be, right? Depending on what happens. But you effectively now open yourself up to different types of damages that would otherwise be recoverable because your claim now lies in something other than contract.
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Some other tort. And so where you may have a limitation of liability with regard to that relationship, if you haven't foreclosed other avenues of recovery, then your limitation of liability actually is not going to do anything for those claims because it's not a claim that's brought in under the contract, right? Yep. So anyway, sorry, we got a little deep into that, didn't we?
But I think it's important. A lot of people, miss that.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's, you got to dig back into your contracts law class. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and and it's kind of like when you do look at the case law and see sort of the evolution of different types of provisions, you can understand sort of what they're meant to do and what they're not meant to do. And so I've talked about it probably way too much, but limitations of liability, and it's it makes sense to accept things like breaches of confidentiality or intellectual property misappropriation because damages are almost impossible to show, whereas a data breach, on the other hand, damages are reasonably foreseeable and calculable.
Yeah.
Right, and as such, really are not subject to. They really shouldn't be excluded from a limitation of liability. And it's the same thing with an indemnification, right? And I myself am pretty flexible on what we're willing to do from an indemnification perspective, but looking at it as a that reasonably foreseeable type of lens is actually the way that most people will look at that. So it is interesting to see how different attorneys negotiated, though. It's fun.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. And also switching gears a little bit, but you're part of Legal Ops Uncensored.
Yes.
So would love to hear how you got involved in the community. We had Marie Widmer on a previous episode, and just hear like how you're liking it.
Yeah. So I actually met Marie when we were both working at HubSpot for probably only 2 weeks together. And she set up a coffee chat to be like, I just joined. I'm so excited to meet you. And I was like, that's great. I'm leaving. But let's stay in touch. And so we have. And when she kicked it off, I just felt that it was a great opportunity to connect with the broader legal ops community. I was the first legal ops hire at HubSpot. And I remember someone saying, hey, have you heard of this thing called Clock? It's kind of new. And I didn't have any friends who did legal ops. Like, I didn't know who to call. I had no phone a friend. I just figured it out. And I think having a community like this that I could have engaged or gone to events with would have really helped me feel like I had someone to connect with where I wasn't really sure which path to take rather than just trial by error, which is, not a bad way to go. But I think it's a good opportunity for folks to learn more about legal ops and what it can do for a legal department, but also have some friends.
Definitely. And you mentioned trial by error. You were telling me that you do something called a failure forum.
Yes. So
very interested to hear more about that.
I like this.
So look, no one likes to admit their mistakes. I was recently somewhere and someone asked the entire room of people to share a failure and no one would do it. They're like, I'll tell you a success instead. And I think as legal professionals, we're afraid to admit that something didn't work out as expected. And I don't know why. I think that legal teams in general often live in the gray and they have to make hard decisions. And they make decisions based on justifications they have, which, hopefully are always right. But there are times where you have to pivot because maybe you picked option A and option B would have been the better avenue and you have to kind of adjust course. And helping to share that knowledge about, hey, I tried it this way and it didn't go so well. I had to pivot and do this new thing instead. Why are we all building Rome by ourselves? I think we, particularly in the operations space, have opportunities to share where things didn't work from a change management perspective or the playbook kind of fell flat. What worked for you? How did you structure it? Those are things that I think we can all collectively lift each other up from. And without talking about it, it's just everyone going out and having some setbacks.
Everyone just talking about their thinly veiled successes as failures.
Right. Well, and I think people are always
one time I was trying to not be so awesome, and I was just awesome.
Pretty much.
Major failure for me.
Yeah. I think it's okay. I think, one of my first internships I ever had, I made a big mistake. And, it was the accountability that I took in that moment and being willing to say, I've made this mistake. And I've shared that with my teams over the years because people get so paralyzed by a decision because they're afraid of failing. Just don't fail too hard. Don't make a catastrophic mistake, but don't be afraid to make any mistake. Otherwise, you'll never accomplish anything.
Yeah, and there's an aspect too of I'm a big proponent of categorizing mistakes in two different buckets. One is the bucket of learning moment or teaching moment mistakes, and then the other is accountability moments mistakes, where it's you want to minimize those accountability ones. And what I mean by that is there are certain mistakes that you should not make.
Yep.
Right? They're just it's unacceptable to make certain mistakes. Not to say that they don't happen, right? You think about letting the classic example of a busy attorney at a law firm who lets the statute of limitations toll before getting their filing in, right? That is awful. That's awful for so many reasons. It should never happen. That's an accountability moment. There's nothing, I don't want to say there's nothing you can learn from that, but, being able to minimize those sort of mistakes that just you shouldn't make and actually maximizing those mistakes where they are teaching moments is really valuable. And I found, for myself, things generally don't go according to plan. Right? When you have a problem, a legal issue, it usually doesn't transpire the way that you anticipated it would transpire. Right? it did, then like you probably just didn't do a good job mitigating it, right? Like if you knew it was going to happen that way, you probably should have done something about it, right?
Yep.
But the biggest thing that a lot of those mistakes will teach you is that you can handle recovering from them.
Yep.
And that's where you're really delivering the most value to, to your organization, is like when things don't go as planned and you're able to confidently say, you know what, they didn't go as planned and maybe that's my fault, but I got it.
Yep.
And you're able to manage it to a resolution. Like that's where your real value is. Because I mean, let's be honest, how many contracts did you review like this quarter so far? I mean,
300 or 400 probably.
yeah, exactly. And it's just like, okay, great. How many of those are actually going to result in problems where you're ever going to look at that contract ever again?
Hopefully none.
Less than 1%, easily less than 1%. And so it's like, to a certain extent, for 99% of those, it was just a waste of time for you to look at them. Right.
Yeah, hopefully.
Right.
That's the best case scenario.
Right. Unless and until something happens that's unexpected.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, now you have it figured out. But you learn more from that unexpected thing happening than from the 300 or 400 agreements that you put together this quarter. Right.
And I think that's why I love end of quarter and end of month so much. It's like you can work all month and you're reviewing contracts at pace and you're getting your stuff done. But at end of quarter, that pressure forces you to have to make hard decisions quickly. Mm-hmm. And that's when you get the most, knowledge and experience on any deal. Yeah.
It's fun. And it's fun too.
Yeah, it is.
That's awesome. Well, we end every episode with some rapid fire questions. So if you're ready, what is your hot take on working in-house?
Ooh, my hot take on working in-house is just that it is a roller coaster of a ride and you have to remain adaptable and be willing to just go with the flow because you never know what each day is going to bring.
Nice. What's your number one playbook tip?
Include a risk matrix for the decisions that your team is going to have to make so that they can quickly assess like how much time they should spend on an event agreement versus a product agreement for your product.
Nice. What is the best piece of career advice that you have ever received or given?
The best career advice I've ever received is to really invest the time to seek to understand and learn your business and put that hat on when you're providing transparency in your response.
Awesome.
Nice. And then what's a charity that's close to your heart that you really want us to try to amplify?
Yeah. So I really love Boston Children's Hospital. Have a pretty close connection to that one. Yeah. So that is one that is near and dear to my heart. Nice.
Well, Ashlyn, thanks so much for taking time to sit down and talk with us. It was great to chat a little bit. And for those of you listening, watching, if you like this, give us a like, give us a follow on all the socials, and we will see you next time. Thanks.